What's up, everyone? And we're back with episode 154 of the Just an Insight podcast. This is a show where we talk to people involved in the world of alternative music, discuss their story and how it got them into music and how it led them to be where they are now. It's been a little while, hasn't it? But if you're a returning listener, thank you so much for sticking with us whilst I sorted all of my equipment issues after everything died on me just as we were kind of going into the whole COVID-19 lockdown. I mean, it was slowly dying anyway, but this was just an excuse for me to kind of hit the pause button and have a bit of a refresh. So I have a brand new laptop, I have a brand new microphone, and I have some awesome guests lined up for the coming weeks. If you're a new listener to the show, thank you very much for checking us out. We have 153 other episodes that you are more than welcome to go check out. Guests varying from Lingua Ignota, Walter from Writing Out, and Serena Cherry from Svalbard, and loads more. So yeah, go check out the back catalogue. We've got loads of awesome chats on there. So if you're here for this week's guest, I'm sure there'll be something else in there that you'll be into. Obviously, at the moment, we're still currently in kind of some form of lockdown, though judging by a lot of the stuff you'd see on the internet, you wouldn't really think that. But just have to say, like, off the bat, I was a little bit naive kind of going into this and thought this whole situation would be kind of resolved by now, and we'd be kind of back to some normality. But here we are, we're still social distancing and whatnot. And yeah, the world's still a bit crazy right now, but thankful for this podcast and being back in the flow of things. But I just kind of wanted to touch upon a few things. Like, people are obviously very much aware, but I thought if I didn't highlight them, then I'd get people being like, or whatever. But just for my own accord, obviously, I just want to kind of say how things have been going. Obviously, here in the UK, our government has been sort of an absolute joke. The whole Dominic Cummings thing, if you're not aware, one of the main government advisors, basically broke his own lockdown procedures to go for a walk with his missus and his son, and basically claimed he went on a 60-mile drive to test his eyesight because he's a fucking moron. But yeah, so we had that, and then we had the murder of George Floyd over in America, which obviously reignited the Black Lives Matter protests, which was a massive thing, not just in the States, but all over the world, and still is. There's still sort of people of colour being killed due to police brutality every day. There's numerous people that were killed in that short space of time around George Floyd's death that officers still haven't been taken into account and things like that, and probably never will be because it's a fucked up system. But yeah, so that's another thing. We've seen the return of sport around the world, like football and things like that. And just because 2020 is so fucked up and so many fucking things that happen, we've also had loads of sexual abuse allegations, coming out surrounding people in the music world, in the wrestling world specifically. That's been a big one. There's been the whole speaking out movement. If you follow wrestling, if not, I think it's if you're kind of wanting to know about this kind of call out culture kind of thing and how it can affect change, go search the speaking out hashtag on Twitter. And there's a lot of stuff going in there. I really hope that it does kind of lead to change in things in the British wrestling scene. But we'll wait and see, I guess, in the further picture of things. But yeah, also other people in further kind of entertainment, like comedians and actors and stuff. So yeah, it's been a pretty fucking crazy time. But I just hope everyone's kind of keeping safe and sane. For myself, for the most part, I have been going a little bit crazy and just bored and stuff. But now that we've kind of got this show back up and running again, it's kind of given me something to focus on, which I'm eternally grateful for, and really happy to be back and stoked to be putting these episodes out again. There's just a couple of more brief things that I want to touch upon before we get to the guest. I know this is going to be a bit of a rambling intro, but it's been a while, so there's things that I want to touch upon. First thing is regarding the whole Black Lives Matter movement. At the time, like especially when things were at their height, I really wanted to do something to show support, but didn't really know what, where, or how. I can't talk apparently. I wanted to attend a protest, but due to sort of like my living situation and sort of my own social anxieties, I didn't think it was appropriate for me to go. I'd used my personal social media platform to kind of amplify voices and kind of put things out there, but I also donated, and I kind of just wanted to kind of, because I wanted to use this podcast as well, but I didn't really know what to do at the time. So I'm just kind of using this now. If there's anyone that kind of still hasn't supported or wants to sort of learn more and things, I'm going to put a couple of links in the description notes just for people to check out. And yeah, that's kind of that on that. The other thing that I wanted to say is just around this show in general, I kind of want to do a bit more of self-promotion as much as I can. It may get on your nerves a little bit, but I want to grow this. I want to do it as much as possible, and I think people enjoy it. Well, I hope people enjoy it anyway. So just straight off the bat, like, if this is your first time listening to the show, on whatever platform you're listening, then please rate, subscribe, review if you can. It really, really helps. Goes a little bit further. Secondly, we're looking to kind of utilize our Patreon a bit more. So in the past, I've only kind of just had it as a tip service and haven't really pushed it or anything, but I'm wanting to put other sort of tier levels in there and give you guys a bit more creativity in terms of the show and input, I guess, in some aspects. So if you want to get involved in that, if you visit patreon.com/JustinInsightPodcast, they'll have all the details on there. I will once again also put a link in the description of this episode. And finally, just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's been supporting An Insight magazine. At least that's kind of been a creative outlet I have been able to do during lockdown. Issue 3 development is well underway, should be completed by the end of July if I'm kind of carrying on at the pace that I am at the moment, so fingers crossed on that. We still have a handful of issues of issue 2 left, so if you want to grab one of those, once again I'll put the link to such in the description notes. Right, that's enough of me rambling on. Let's get to our returning guest, and I am joined by the awesome guitarist of Misery Signals and Comeback Kid, Stu Ross. I had the pleasure of meeting Stu last summer when I was out with my good friends in Svalbard. They did a little run with Comeback Kid over the summer. It was only 3 dates, but I was with 4 because the Comeback Kid guys did 2000 Trees and I was at that as well. So got to know Stu a little bit over that, but it was really cool to kind of sit down, have a chat with him and get to know him a bit more for this show. Full disclosure, sorry. I'm kind of obviously doing these chats over Zoom at the moment. I'm using a new mic, which I'm still kind of getting used to the settings and stuff on, and trying to sort of edit 2 lines of audio, which is something I haven't really done in the past. I've always kind of just recorded things in one bulk file and tweaked it there and such. So there are a couple of bits where there's overlapping chat where the Zoom chat on Stu's end cuts out because I'm talking or laughing or whatever. But I've tried to edit it as best as to my abilities. So, but just please bear with me while I kind of get used to that process. But I think it sounds all right, and there's only various little glitches and you kind of get the gist of what either of us are saying. Anyway, during the chat we talk about Misery Signals, the reason why, the rise of Misery Signals. We talk about the reason why Stu stepped away from the band for a little while, what it was like for him to join Comeback Kid and now obviously adding to their legacy, and how things have now come full circle with Misery Signals with the upcoming release of Ultraviolet. So, yeah, please sit back, enjoy the chat I have with Stu, and I'll see you on the other side. So, joining me this week on the Just an Insight podcast is guitarist of Misery Signals and Comeback Kid, Stu Ross. Stu, thank you very much for taking some time out of your day to have a chat with me. How is everything? It feels like, well, it's 2 summers ago since we saw each other.
Last summer, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, God, it's last summer. Jesus, just shows how long ago. But yeah, how is everything in your world?
Pretty quiet, to be honest. I mean, obviously with the state of the world and COVID-19, things have slowed down quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, this time of year, we're usually on the road and playing gigs overseas and, back at home traveling and playing North America and stuff. But it's been pretty quiet, and it's been a bit of an adjustment, to be honest. A lot of free time, just kind of trying to figure out what to do with myself for the foreseeable future. Yeah.
Because where are you? Are you in Canada?
Yeah, I'm in Vancouver.
So, because obviously I can only go off what we kind of hear on the news and stuff over here. So how have things kind of been dealt with in Canada? Because obviously we see the shit show that is the States, and my country is not much better. But how's kind of it been dealt with in Canada?
I mean, on the surface, as far as the media goes, it seems like it's being portrayed as that Canada is doing a good job of containing outbreaks and whatnot. And, living in Vancouver, it's kind of hard to say because further out in central Canada and eastern Canada through Ontario and Quebec, there's quite a few cases, and it's running pretty rampant still. But in BC, Canada's response was pretty quick and thorough, I think, in regard to, they said, okay, everybody stay home. We're going to sort this out. Everybody stay home for 2 weeks. Nobody's going to work. Nobody's socializing, that sort of stuff. And I think people were pretty quick to be like, okay, if that's what we got to do, that's what we got to do. And then, 2 weeks has turned into sort of 4 months. But as far as like Vancouver goes, we're in what they call phase 3 at this point. So they've opened bars, they've opened parks, they've opened gyms. Masks are not mandatory, but I think in like a busy setting, you would probably want to be wearing one. I don't know the numbers offhand right now, but like British Columbia, like the province of British Columbia, wasn't hit that badly. So it's kind of like a weird vibe because I only know like a few people who have sort of encountered COVID-19 firsthand, and those are people in America. So I mean, nobody in my circle at home that I know has contracted it or had to deal with it. So it's been kind of weird because it's just this sort of like mysterious cloak that's kind of put everything on hold, but you don't see anything firsthand, which is probably a good thing. I mean, it would suck if everybody was getting sick and it was that's but no, it's cool. I mean, and it's unfortunate, like the whole thing is pretty frightening, but like Vancouver is pretty chill and the weather is good right now, so there's not too many restrictions. You can go to the gym, you can go for a bike ride, you can go to your friend's place for a barbecue, but no concerts, no sporting events. I personally myself I'm not really into like bar culture or pub culture or anything, so I don't really like go to bars or anything. So that didn't really like affect much for me. So we've just had like a lot of time, my wife and I, we just like exercise, go to the gym, try and get out daily and just make the most of like kind of the, I guess, free time we have.
Yeah. I was just like, well, literally yesterday was the first day that they opened pubs and bars and stuff over here, so obviously British drinking culture is finest. So everyone was very much out back, but I'm very much like you, like obviously I don't drink anyway, so the whole bar culture is not my scene anyway. But obviously instantly, like, you've got the like news outlets and whatever putting pictures of people queuing outside Weatherspoons at like 6 a.m. and stuff to get their first pint of the day, and it's just like, Really? Is that what you're gonna do? But
Yeah,
that's
it's pretty wild what people equate with like being their, I guess, personal freedom. Like I saw
yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of my friends in the UK kind of posting stuff, just being like, "You people are twats. Use your head."
yeah,
Priority, which like I totally understand. Um, I think people want things to get back to normal, and part of those steps is like definitely not going to the pub. So
yeah, yeah,
I mean, it's crazy. It's like the same with the U.S. Man. Like I just don't even understand what's going on. You've got all these like university and college students, just like partying and going to lakes and riding tubes down rivers, and it's like, man, these people are crazy.
yeah, yeah. Well, we'll get on to more exciting things, and we'll talk about music, and we'll talk about you. So, how I usually always like to kind of open this up is to ask, like, what kind of got you into alternative music in the first place? Can you remember what your first sort of interaction with it was?
Like music in general.
Well, more kind of like alternative sort of styles.
Yeah. So I mean, when I was a kid, um, I trying to think what kind of came first, whether it was skateboarding or music. But when I was a kid, like my exposure to music was like kind of funny. Like neither of my parents are really musical, nor do they listen to like a lot of like different music. Like my mom
Yeah,
would listen to like the Pointer Sisters and Robert Palmer and Doobie Brothers, and this was all just like cassettes in the car. So that's kind of the stuff I was exposed to when I was really young. My dad liked a lot of like country music, I guess, Elvis Presley.
yeah,
Um, so that sort of stuff was around me when I was a kid. But then, like, I remember getting like my family was in London actually for like my dad had a business thing, and somehow we managed to go over there. And we have some family in the UK, so we were visiting as well. But I remember we went to see some musicals. And we saw Phantom of the Opera and Starlight Express sort
nice,
of stuff. And I remember, getting like the double cassettes from those, and that was like I
nice.
do when I was a kid. And then yeah, through that, like I can remember like listening to the radio, and I think like uh like Spin Doctors and stuff like that. But like my sister was kind of like into. I have an older sister, she's about 3 years older than me, and when she started getting into um, Red Hot Chili Peppers and Pearl Jam and bands like that. I guess that was like my first exposure to that, and
Yeah,
I like that music. Like I still love those bands to this day, and especially those records like Pearl Jam 10 and Blood Sugar Sex Magic. Um, but I think through skateboarding, I kind of was exposed to like Metallica and Pantera, and that was just because like the older guys that I was like kind of hanging around with would have those T-shirts and be listening.
yeah, yeah,
And I can remember like going to like skate demos when I was probably like 11 or 12 years old. I couldn't tell you exactly, but getting like these like promotional cassettes. I remember there was one that had like quicksand on it, and I thought that was
yeah.
like it was Thorn in My Side was on that cassette, and I thought that was a really cool song. And that's just kind of like how I got into that. And then obviously like bands like Nirvana and Green Day and stuff were coming up and getting big at that point, and I was exposed to that. So yeah, I guess just mostly through word of mouth and I guess a little bit of radio exposure.
Yeah. And so, where, like, I guess sort of quicksand in some aspects is kind of a jumping in point, but like, when did that sort of evolve into the more kind of like hardcore sound that people kind of associate you with now? Like, when did you kind of start discovering those kind of bands?
Yeah, probably around, I want to say like probably around like 12 or 13 years old. I can remember um, hearing the song "A New Level" by Pantera, and just
Yeah,
whoa, what is this? And that from there I started getting into Pantera and Sepultura. Um, but like on the like kind of like on the lighter spectrum of that, like I had a lot of friends that loved like Nirvana, but Green Day was a big, like probably like the biggest band for me, like still to this day. They're probably like the most, if I'd never heard Green Day, I probably would never have gotten into a lot of stuff that I got into. But,
yeah,
so through Green Day, I started paying attention to, I guess, like what would be like punk. And kind of picking up whatever little scraps I could here and there. And, so through that, I got into, Rancid and Pennywise and No Use for a Name and bands like that. And that's kind of like, when you were younger, you buy the CD and then you look at everything about it. You go through all the liner notes and things like that. And, a pretty like common thing back then was like the thanks list on a record. And then like, 30 different bands. And then you'd be like, okay, well, I guess I got to check out these bands. And that's kind of like how I got into listening to more and more punk music, I guess.
Yeah. So what, like the other thing that I kind of ask, because I guess yours is a bit of a, not necessarily unique way, because I think a lot of people discover music that way, but a lot of people, like, they kind of put onto bands by friends and things like that. But I always find it interesting, like, if there's like one band that you would say, I guess you kind of mentioned Green Day a little bit, but like, I guess on the heavier spectrum of things, was there one band that like you stumbled across off your own accord that you were like, okay, this is now my band, like this is the band that I've latched onto and can relate to, sort of thing?
Like more specifically, like with heavy music?
Yeah.
I mean, early on, definitely like Metallica and Pantera, Sepultura. But like, I mean, if you want to jump forward like quite a bit, like kind of like what got me more into like hardcore, like I was pretty into like kind of the Fat Records, Epitaph stuff. So, like Strung Out and Good Riddance, like I loved Good Riddance. And then I don't know what connection was made there, but I was turned on to Strife. So I got like a Strife 7-inch that had, what song is it? To an End was like one of the songs. But anyway, so, and then I bought In This Defiance, and that kind of like opened up like hardcore for me, I guess. Was Strife In This Defiance was probably the first like real like victory hardcore record that I got. And then, through that, Snapcase, Hatebreed, the victory world was kind of opened up there.
Yeah. And then in terms of you actually kind of like playing music yourself, like you mentioned kind of like skateboarding and things like that. So which kind of came first? Like, were you skating and then playing music? Were you playing music then skating, or did they both kind of come along simultaneously?
I think kind of simultaneously, but like I was never good at skateboarding, and I think I was always more drawn towards like the aesthetic and the culture that surrounded it. So
yeah,
like I was never the guy that was like doing cool skateboard tricks, but like I liked all the artwork. I liked the style and the music that came along with that. So I think that was more of an attraction for me. And like not being able to be good at skateboarding, I was like, well, at least I can be a part of this culture in this regard. So like, I think music kind of like took a priority for me. When I was younger, like a lot of my friends owned guitars or played instruments or were trying to learn how to play instruments. And, they'd all want to learn kind of songs that, like nobody really wanted to play like punk music, like a lot of my friends were into like Slayer and Metallica and Cannibal Corpse and stuff like that. And I would, be wanting to learn like a Rancid song. So eventually I think I just like kind of figured like I could just write my own music and stuff. So music definitely took a priority over skateboarding, but like I definitely still would ride around and hang around with my friends. I just like never got good at skateboarding. So yeah, music took the priority.
And like in terms of kind of you actually like playing and things like that, obviously we know you now as like a very active touring guitarist and things like that. But was it guitar that you were always drawn to, or did you kind of dabble with anything else before settling on guitar? Where did that all come from?
Yeah, I definitely, like when I was a kid, I like my parents were very like supportive in me trying things out. So like I had kind of done everything under the sun as far as like sports go, like tried hockey, tried basketball, tried martial arts, tried everything. And it was something that like I never like got into. So I think, when I told, you're a kid, and I told my dad, hey, I want to play music. He said, okay, well, if you take guitar lessons for 6 months, I'll take you seriously. So I did that. I did the 6 months, and at that point, like everybody was kind of playing guitar or playing drums. So I was like, oh, well, I'll just play bass. So that was the first instrument that I guess I really spent any time with, was playing bass.
Yeah.
And, you know, at that point, being into bands like Green Day and Rancid, like the bass is a very prominent, important instrument in
Yeah.
bands. So, you know, I kind of cut my teeth dabbling and trying to figure out those bass lines. But then, as I said, like all my friends weren't really on the same path as I was musically. So it eventually got to a point where I was like, well, if I can play bass, I can play guitar. And if I can play guitar, I can write my own songs. So I just started playing guitar. And kind of, I think like of my friend group or like the kids I was playing with, nobody was really trying to write their own music. So it took me some time to like find other people to play music with.
Yeah.
And, you know, and again, same thing. It was like, well, we want to play like fast hardcore, but nobody plays drums. And if they do, they're playing along to like Bon Jovi or something. So okay,
Yeah.
I'll figure it out. So I, you know, was a bit of like a table tapper, and then I just kind of like figured out the mechanics in my head. And I you know, I played drums quite a bit when I was a teenager. And then, you know, playing guitar in bands, I don't get to spend as much time playing drums as I would like to. I kind of think like maybe if I would have kept on playing drums, I'd probably be pretty good by now.
Yeah. But so was it a case of like, I guess, the need to want to play music more than any specific instrument that you were drawn to, kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. But it, you know, like kind of like, especially with punk and metal, like it's all really guitar driven. So it just felt like necessity to play guitar and to be able to write my own songs.
Mm. And I guess like that, on that kind of idea of sort of like writing your own songs and things, like you said, kind of your friendship group and whatever were kind of more metal leaning and things like that. Like, I don't know, like, did you just always have that creative mind of wanting to sort of have your own outlet? Because I think a lot of musicians, like when they start off, maybe the first thing they think of is not necessarily I want to write music. It's kind of learning the basics and kind of, I don't know, doing cover bands and things like that. But did you always kind of have in mind like, oh no, I want to kind of follow my own path rather than doing a Green Day rip-off band sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it was like pretty clear to me when I was a teenager that, you know, like especially with punk music, that it's like anybody can do this. Anybody can write songs and book a tour and do this, and it's like attainable if you just like apply yourself to it. And I think that was like a cool thing for me, just knowing that that was something that I could actually do. You know, like I wasn't super academic, I wasn't super athletic, you know, and there was nothing that I was like particularly really good at. So it was like, it was just sort of a thing that I, you know, this could be mine. I could do this. And it seemed attainable. And, you know, like playing music with a lot of kids, you know, they get disinterested or they're like not super good at it right out the gate. So they just kind of give up. But it's like, I guess I just always saw it as something that like, if I just kept on trying at it, eventually I could do it, you know?
Yeah.
Because, you know, looking at some of those, you know, those bands that I was really influenced by, especially, you know, like Green Day or Rancid or something like that. Those dudes were in their 20s when those records were coming out. So I was like, okay, if these guys can do it, I can definitely do it. So yeah, I think that was kind of the driving force behind that.
And because obviously, again, I can only kind of go off my experience over here in the UK, and I don't have any sort of frame of reference of what the music scene's like over in Canada. But like when you were growing up, were there kind of like shows that you were going to? Like, was there anything kind of like, when did you kind of start going to kind of more punk shows and things like that? Because I guess like being part of like the skate culture, that was maybe part of hand in hand. But do you remember sort of any specific shows that you were going to when you were younger?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was one of those things that I was really hungry for. And, you know, this obviously predates the internet. So it's like, honestly, like there would be like one flyer for a show, you know, taped to a light post outside of a grocery store, or there'd be a flyer up at a skate shop. And especially back in the day, like I don't know how it is now, because I don't really frequent skateboard shops much, but you know, when I was coming up, that's like where you could get your information. You know, there'd be flyers for concerts and things like that. So I think it was just like about finding out where these things were happening, and then we would convince one of our parents to drop us off at these things. The very first, like, you know, like where I grew up in the suburbs, there was like a couple local bands, and they would do shows at like the one sort of community hall that we had suburbs. So I'm not complete, like, I think I probably would have gone to one of those shows with just like local bands before I really kind of went to like a real sort of like Edmonton punk scene show. But like the very first like real punk show I remember going to was Anti-Flag, and this band from Vancouver called DBS, and another band from Calgary called the Everymen. And that was kind of like my first exposure to like, these were smaller punk bands, but they were touring punk bands. So, you know, like, and this is, I don't know, maybe 95 or something. But shortly after that, I was like, okay, well, I went to a punk show and it was safe. I didn't get beat up. There wasn't like, nobody was trying to force me to take drugs or like, you know, because that's kind of like the fear, you know, punks are crazy. Get involved in that stuff. But yeah, I went and it was exciting, and I loved it. And from there, I just kind of like started trying to go to every show that I possibly could. And I can kind of remember as a kid, those shows, you know, I saw that the Anti-Flag show. And then I think like shortly after that, I would have seen, it was like Rancid and AFI. And then I saw No Use for a Name and High Standard and 10-Foot Pole and Face to Face and Bouncing Souls. So all these shows were happening, you know, like, and it just like, all it took was for me to go to one, and then it was like, oh, well, this is happening like every weekend. These bands from like all over the world are playing in my city, which is wild because I like didn't know that because I was a kid. But yeah, so I mean, like, because I had gone to like some bigger concerts, you know, I'd seen like Soundgarden and I'd seen Green Day in like a stadium, but you know, even like a year earlier, you know, Green Day would have been playing like a venue, like a small That's like definitely bummed that I was a little late on that, but yeah, that was sort of like my first exposure, was just going to that one punk show, and then, you know, the rest from there, it became all that I wanted to do. And again, like, it's like everything that drew me to that is, you know, like the music was very cool, but like I loved the aesthetic, I loved like the art, I loved everything that kind of surrounded it, and it just felt like what I'd been looking for, you know.
And like, I guess kind of off that, it might be that same show, but like, was there a specific show that you can remember that you thought like, oh, this is obtainable for me, like this is something that I can go out and do, kind of thing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, talking about that band DBS from Vancouver, they're probably 3 or 4 years older than I am. And I can remember when I went to see Rancid, DBS opened. It was DBS, AFI, and Rancid. And, you know, these are like 15, 16-year-old kids that are on tour playing like shows. And that's when I was like, oh, these guys, like, what did they do? Why can they do this? Like, what, they just wrote their own songs and did a record, and now they're on tour? Like, cool. I guess that's something that I can do. So yeah, it was just kind of like figuring out how to do that, which I didn't really figure out on my own, to be honest. Like, touring seemed like such a daunting, scary thing because I just didn't know how to do it, you know? So when I was younger, I started doing shows for touring bands that were coming through. I didn't do a lot, but, you know, people would get my phone number from somebody and say, you know, this person said that you can put a show on for us, and I'd do it. And I saw it as an opportunity to put my bands on the bill as well, you know? So I did that, but, you know, I didn't really get a lot of exposure to touring until I joined Misery Signals. You know, we did, with my previous bands, you know, we had done like a couple small sort of regional tours where we would go through BC, or, you know, take 2 weeks to go through like 2 provinces, which is insane, and play like every little small town, and nobody would turn up, but, you know, we were trying to do it. But I didn't really get a lot of exposure to, you know, the touring world until I started playing with Misery Signals.
Yeah. And obviously that's kind of like where a lot of people have kind of got to know you from, is obviously Misery Signals and stuff. But as you mentioned kind of beforehand, sort of like, I guess, learning the ropes sort of thing, you kind of were going from bass to guitar and even drums and things. So if we go back to the very beginning, like your first kind of band, what were you playing in that band, and what sort of vibe was that band all about?
I mean, that there was phases, you know. So like the first like kind of like real band I was in was a band that was first called Uncalled For, with a 4. And
Nice.
that was like a punk band, and you know, like when you're younger, you know, genres or like styles didn't really matter too much, but you know, like, so with that band, like I know like our drummer like loved Operation Ivy, and I was really into,
Yeah.
you know, Good Riddance. So like, I mean, which are two bands that, you know, don't really sound alike, but like to the average person, they'd be like, yeah, whatever, it's punk music.
Yeah.
But so that band was just kind of like a weird mix of like us like finding bands, because, you know, like we'd be like into like Oxymoron or Defiance and like sort of these more like street punk bands, but then, you know, we're also listening to like No Effects, which is, you know, hyper melodic kind of like skate punk. So that band was just kind of weird. And then like we all kind of collectively got into like sort of like the Profane Existence, Havoc Records, kind of like crusty stuff. So that band kind of eventually morphed into like almost like a crusty band.
Okay.
And by that time we had changed our name to the Symbiotics, which is also a very cool name for a band. Cool. So we did that. So that was probably like the first real band I was in. We didn't really do any touring. We would play, you know, like an hour out of the city or something, but we never really did any real touring with that band. And then I started playing guitar for a band called Pressure Point, not to be confused with the California Oi band. It was like kind of just like 10-foot pole skate punk worship,
Right.
kind of stuff. And again, like that band was like, they were a pretty good band, and they were like a 3-piece. And then I started playing guitar, and then I just kind of like, you know, again, I saw that as a vehicle to like kind of like get somewhere. So we that band, we started kind of like recording and trying to play shows quite a bit. And then, you know, we went through like a few different drummers and all this sort of stuff. And then again, eventually like that band started as like a skate punk band, and eventually ended up sounding like Grade or Hot Water Music, because that's like what we were listening to, and it kind of
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. And that was sort of like the last band I was in before Misery Signals. We had another band like right at the tail end that was called The Hollywood Ending, which is also another great, terrible name for a band. Which I think some of that stuff's on YouTube, and I'm not actually like super embarrassed by that stuff, because we're like pretty good players by that point. And again, that was like, you know, I was starting to get influenced, like, you know, I'd gone through, you know, Grade and Hot Water Music, Small Brown Bike, and, you know, a lot of Equal Vision record stuff. Like that's when we were starting to get into like Saves the Day and bands like Piebald and stuff like that. So that sound, the Hollywood Ending stuff is kind of like more like especially in Western Canada too, like kind of like techie punk was kind of a thing, like odd time signatures, and like not really like shreddy, but just like really like, I guess kind of arty in a sense. I don't know. But yeah, so that band was kind of cool, and that was like the last band that I played in before Misery Signals.
Yeah. And then in terms of kind of like you said, obviously, like in terms of big scale touring, obviously it wasn't until you got to Misery Signals, but you'd done a little bit here and there with the previous bands sort of thing. So what was your kind of, like, as you said, kind of having this idea of tour as this kind of big, scary, kind of daunting thing, like when you finally kind of made that leap and started playing further afield and things, like what was your kind of experience of that? Like, did you have any expectations of what tour was going to be like? Did it kind of meet them? Was it better than you were expecting? How did that go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that I really had an expectation. I kind of think like just because the band was based in America and, hardcore and metalcore and stuff in America was happening at that point. It was like a big thing. So, like, I think maybe I kind of thought like, oh, I'm going to join this band and we're going to be a big band. Like this
Yeah.
happened. But I mean, when I dove into those touring with Misery Signals, a lot of it, the first year or so I was in the band was basement shows, really small bars, jumping on any show we could get on, and it was really like kind of just like flying by the seat of our pants kind of thing. Like we would have a tour booked, and we'd have a month full of dates, and every day we'd just be playing somewhere, even if some days it was a 45-minute drive, other days it was a 10-hour drive. It's just like we were just going. So my expectations were not really existent beyond like, I thought like, okay, well, we're going to do it. I'm going to be in a band and, this could be big. And, it felt like there was some buzz around Misery Signals at the time that I joined them. Seven Angels, Seven Plagues had broken up. And this was like, they were like kind of growing and poised to be like a bigger band. And then Misery Signals started, and it was just an opportunity for me to like dive in head first. And it's kind of like not typical or characteristic of me because I'm pretty like methodical, I guess. So like when the opportunity to join the band was there, I just said like, yo, I'll do it, like in passing, kind of like probably
Yeah.
about it. And then it was a thing, like then it was like, okay, well, I guess you better learn the songs because we have a tour in April or something. And I was like, okay. So I just started learning the songs and jumped on tour.
Yeah. And as you kind of touched upon there, like obviously I was sort of growing up at a period of time when that upward trajectory of Misery Signals was kind of very prominent. Like I think obviously Of Malice was like the album that kind of shaped a lot of people my age's kind of like that kind of, if you were into metal and hardcore, that was kind of like the tipping point of like you either that album like either went into the hardcore realm because of that album, or that album was a bit too hardcore and you were like, oh, I'm not too sure about this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But then obviously like Mirrors came out as well, and that was kind of like skyrocketing sort of thing. So I don't want to kind of go through the history of the band because I think that's been well documented, but like to be part of that sort of like monster and seeing it grow, what was it like being in that at the time and kind of, I guess from an inward point of view, seeing the buzz grow?
Yeah, I mean, so just to touch on it quickly, I think one thing that is kind of like interesting about Misery Signals is that I don't think any of us were really ever like super into metalcore. So like,
Yeah.
we were writing this style of music that was, I guess, categorized as metalcore, but it was like, we had really like drastic influences between us, like I said, I was into a lot of like punk and skate punk, and Ryan comes from a world that's more, Rage Against the Machine and almost like alternative rock that he was into, Hum and bands like that, Deftones. And Jesse was very much into Madball and Sick of It All and bands like that, and Kyle loves like classic rock, and Brandon loves drumming in general. So we were never setting out to be like, oh, we need to write a record that sounds like Martyr AD or something. We were just like writing music, and it was pretty melodic and it was heavy, and that just kind of like came together that way. And sorry, so I've kind of dodged the question, but you're asking about like what if it was noticeable, like the feeling like the band was getting bigger.
Yeah, or just kind of like just being in part of it, like what was it kind of like seeing more people paying attention to the band and kind of get that like that buzz that you saw when you joined, like seeing that grow?
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously very exciting, and it was like, especially sort of in Canada, we noticed like a big jump really quick, maybe because that was sort of like that wave kind of hit a little later in Canada than it did in the US. So it was like with us being like kind of a half Canadian band, you know, it was really noticeable in places like Vancouver and Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, where that scene was kind of growing, and we were kind of on the forefront of it in a weird way. I'm not sure why that was, but like, you know, those places were always really, really, really supportive of us, especially like in the States too, you know, like the Northeast and New York City, California, Southern California was always really great. You know, it was exciting to be a part of, for sure. And that's not to say that the band ever got enormous, you know, like, you know, we were a band that felt like we were always kind of like climbing, but then we sort of like plateaued at where we're at. And we've kind of like sat at that point for a long time where it's like, we're not a big band, but we were like just about kind of big, you know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely like certain markets and certain shows that we played in the past that, you know, we're like, wow, this is crazy, you know. But, you know, you're always kind of sort of chasing that. And when it's happening, I'm not completely sure that I was registering it. You know what I mean? Because you always, when you're chasing something, you always want something bigger and better. So I think we knew the band was getting bigger and it was exciting. And it, you know, obviously when you're playing shows and people are like singing along and know the words, and it definitely makes you feel important or accomplished. But I don't ever think like we were at a point where we're like, we made it, this is it, you know. I feel like we're always kind of chasing that. Yeah.
Well, I guess like, because the other thing that I always kind of ask, and I guess you kind of touched upon it a bit there, but like, was there a moment, because I don't know, like it might just be the perspective I've got as someone from the UK that views Misery Signals, but there's almost kind of like, if you're a fan of Misery Signals, like you're fully in sort of thing, like you're not, it's not like a half foot in half foot out sort of thing, like you either love the band or like it's not your cup of tea kind of thing. So was there kind of like a moment when you guys kind of realized like, oh, like people further afield than the States and Canada do give a shit about us, and like, not that like, as you say, we're this big band kind of thing, but like people were paying attention and people care about this band?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Misery Signals has always had like a, I don't know if cult following is the right term, but it's like, you're right. Like people who like Misery Signals, like love Misery Signals and like live and die for the band, you know? Like,
Yeah.
get a lot of people who are kind of, you know, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So I think there's something to be said for that, just in the sense that like, I think we have been lucky to have a loyal following of people who like the band, and I think like, you know, have stuck with the band through all the albums. But yeah, I mean, like I think as far as like melodic hardcore metalcore goes, like I think we found our niche and we ran with it, and I think people enjoy that and have stuck with the band.
And just in going back to kind of like the touring element of things, as you say, like when you kind of joined the band and sort of were going on these tours and sort of realized like, oh no, this is what an actual touring band is kind of like, sort of thing. Like more specifically in those kind of early days of the band, were there any sort of tours that kind of stand out in the memory of kind of like significant moments for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like sort of like the first like not big, but first like extensive tour I ever did with the band was like kind of, you know, I joined the band in, I think it was April 2003. Yeah. And we did a tour with Figure 4, which is Andrew from Comeback Kids' old band. Him and Jeremy had a band called Figure 4. And we toured with them. And then from there, we jumped into this tour that was like 3 months long with Bury Your Dead, where we basically just, we just like circled the US like twice. Like I remember we like started in the Midwest. We did like the entire United States. We were back in Milwaukee for like 3 days, and then we just like did it all again. And it was like, it was crazy. It was like 60 or 70 days or something, like just like the whole summer, like May through August, we were just like touring in the US. And it was just like, it was fun, man. Like at that point, it wasn't like, we weren't making money, but we were able to play every day, and we had enough money to like keep the van running and
yeah.
staying at people's houses and meeting people. And I mean, that's another thing that was like super exciting about that, right? Is it's like meeting all these people and meeting other bands and like kind of just finding common ground with all these people. And I guess that kind of circles back to like what we were talking about when I was younger, like knowing that I wanted to do this thing, but not really having a lot of friends that wanted to pursue the same goals. So it was like, it's really cool to travel, especially at that age, and meet all these people. And it was all really exciting, to be honest. That tour sticks out a lot. But sort of when we started doing, I guess what you would call like more like larger tours, was sort of when we did the deal with Ferret. And you know, instantly, like at that point, that's like when labels were really helping out and pushing to get bands on tours, especially younger bands, which I'm still a thing, but like I just haven't been in a younger band in a long time. And when I say young, like as far as like the existence of the band.
Yeah.
But with Misery Signals, you know, like we signed with Ferret, we did the record, like we did Malice, and then like as soon as we were finished recording Malice, it was like Ferret was like, okay, sick. Well, we got you this tour with, it was Dillinger Escape Plan. Who else was on the tour? Dillinger Escape Plan, Every Time I Die, Zayo, and you guys. And that was like, wow, that's like a crazy tour.
That's ridiculous.
But I'm kind of missing something too. Like the first big tour we did, I guess, was like the Ferret Music Tour, which would have been, it was like Zayo headlining, Remembering Never, 12 Tribes, us, and another band called Scarlet, which were all just bands on Ferret. But that felt like the first like big tour that I ever did. And those weren't like huge venues, you know, but there were probably, you know, 200 to 500 cap rooms, but like people were turning up. And it was like, you know, the first tour that I was ever on where it was like, there was a tour manager. There was a guy who was like, this is what time you're playing. Like shows weren't running till 2 a.m. There wasn't 16 bands.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, here's a venue with a sound system and security and dressing rooms and, oh, a rider, like here's some drink tickets or like peanut butter sandwiches or something, you know, like whoa, this is crazy. And that was sort of like the first tour, I guess, that we did that was like a real tour. And then, you know, after that, we kind of just started doing like pretty awesome tours after that. We were always on the road though. So it was like, we would do these sort of like higher profile tours. And then we just do headlining stuff around it just to keep busy. So I think that was like a very helpful thing with the band because, you know, we would do these headlining shows and people would come see us after they'd seen us open for these larger bands. So, you know, we did some pretty cool tours after that, you know, like Darkest Hour and Bleeding Through. We toured quite a bit with Zayo back then. We did some Norma Jean stuff, like all that sort of stuff that was like kind of like building block tours that definitely assisted the band in becoming like more of our own sustainable attraction for people to come see.
Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, like obviously my first sort of interaction with you guys was with Malice, and like obviously fandom grew from there. And I think like it's weird, like still, well for me still today, like that's an album I will happily put on whenever sort of thing. Like, and all these years later, like it still fucking holds up. So do you revisit it? Like, or are you one of those people like once an album's done, like you can't sort of go back for it for a while?
No, I always listen to my own music. And like, that might sound kind of funny, but like, you know, I don't like put on Malice like regularly or anything, but
yeah.
Sometimes like a song will come on shuffle, or, you know, if I'm feeling like nostalgic, I'll listen to the entire record. That album in particular is really funny just because it's so unique in its production style. And, you know, we've talked about like getting it remixed or remastered, which we may do someday, but it's like, I feel like that record has such a unique identity just because of the way it's recorded and the way it's mixed. Like, you know, we recorded that album in like a awesome studio with an awesome producer with Devin. And, you know, we spent like a month recording this thing and then it was mixed in like 7 hours. You know what I mean? Like we literally like, finished the last guitar chord at like or the last, whatever we were recording, we finished recording at, let's say, like 8 p.m. on Friday. And, we just mixed until like 4 a.m. on Saturday. And then we like got in the van and drove home. And it was like, okay, record's done. But it's just crazy to think, like, you put, like, especially now with like the way that, like, Misery Signals or Come Back Kid records records, like the mix is such an important part of the album.
Yeah.
And but when we mixed Malice, it was really just like, we were all just sitting in a room and we're like, yeah, it sounds great. And we'd be like, oh, can you turn that part up a little bit? Crank it up a little bit. But like, just pretty funny to like think about like putting all this money into doing a record and then putting all this time like recording it, and then just the mix is like turn a few knobs. Like, okay, we're done. So that record's cool. I'm still proud of it to this day, and I think like it does have a, I talk about this quite a bit with like other bands. Like when bands are in their infancy and they're kind of like finding their sound, sometimes that's when like their best records happen. And I'm not being like those guys who's like, I only like the demo, but like, I think so. That record is just like, I think it's a great representation of like who we were as people. Like we were just like young, energetic kids. And I think it speaks to a lot of our influences. I'm still super proud of that record, and I would love to hear it remixed, to be honest. But again, like I wouldn't want to take away from like, I guess like the whatever makes that record what it is.
Yeah. And I just want to kind of like a bit of a sort of a personal story around that record, but it's kind of more up to date. So, are you aware of a band here in the UK called Employed to Serve?
Yes, I know the name.
Yeah.
Heard a little bit of it. I think it's one of those things where I like heard the name, downloaded it, listened to a song. It's like, yeah, that's pretty cool, and then just like didn't dive much more into it, to be honest.
Well, the reason I bring it up, so their vocalist and guitarists, Sammy and Justine, end of last year they got married, but they had a bit of an unconventional stag and hen do, whereas they put on a gig for their stag and hen.
Awesome.
But it's all just like mates bands and things like that. And the band that kind of headlined it were a band called We Never Learn to Live. And they opened their set with a cover of A Victim and a Target, and the room just went fucking nuts. So it was just a really kind of weird kind of crossover of two worlds coming together for what was essentially a massive party, which was really fun.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
But then, oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was gonna say it's kind of crazy. Like over the years, there's people that like their weddings, like they'll like walk down the aisle to Worlds and Dreams or like something like that.
Yeah.
Crazy. It's pretty cool.
But so then if we kind of like move on in terms of like where you were, so you obviously stepped away from the band for a period of time. So what was the kind of like reasoning behind that? Was it just kind of you needed time away? Like where did that kind of come into things?
I did. And it's at the time, it seemed like such a huge thing, like, oh, I'm leaving the band or whatever. And okay, like, how do I break this down? So basically, yeah, we had been touring really hard for a lot of years, which now it doesn't seem like it was that long, but, we had been at it for, 6 or 7, 8 years, touring really hard. And we were, like I said earlier, when you're kind of like putting so much of yourself into something, sometimes the results are never enough. And we had been touring so hard, and I'm Canadian, and I had been living in the US between tours, and it wasn't bad living. It was great. Like I was living with the guys, and we were living and breathing the band 24/7. But it just got to a point where I was away from home. I was away from I had just started dating my now wife at the time. And, again, we had just been touring super hard, and I just didn't feel like I had a lot of time to do other things, I guess. And it wasn't that I didn't want to be in a band, because I left Misery Signals and basically stepped right into playing with another band called Living with Lions. That's like a more like a punk band. But yeah, I don't know. I think I just kind of got to the end of it. We did this tour with the Amity Affliction from Australia, who were buddies of ours, and we were over there, and they were just like blowing up and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think, you know, not to say like, I mean, definitely like in some way with Misery Signals, one thing that has always been hard, and I don't want to say this in a way that like sounds mean or harsh, but it's like a lot of bands that we toured with, a lot of bands that we took on tour just kind of seemed to grow and get bigger than us, you know. Hard to watch these bands that we would take out on tour sort of just like get past us and become bigger bands.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not trying to like toot our own horn, but like, you know, a lot of bands will talk about how they're like influenced by us, or like, you know, like, oh, we take a lot of, you know, our sound from like what Misery Signals did. And then it's like, you know, we just kind of just never grew. And that was like frustrating for me, I think, in a sense, just after putting years and years into something, you know, especially with like an album like Controller that like we were so proud of, and we put so much work into it, and people liked it. Like, I'm not saying that it wasn't well received, but it still just wasn't the record that like, you know, took us to the next level.
Yeah.
So when we went into this tour with Amity Affliction, it was a super fun tour, and it was great. And it, you know, it was, as far as Australia goes, it was like the biggest shows we'd ever played in Australia. They had just released Youngbloods, and that was like, you know, some of the rooms were like 2,000 cap rooms, and we were just like, holy shit, this is crazy. Like, they were great shows. But I just think I just got to a point where I was like, if I'm not doing something that is like making me completely happy, and I'm putting everything else in my life on hold, maybe I need to try something different. And I think that sentiment was shared with Kyle, like our bass player. Him and I kind of had this conversation and brought it to the band and just said, look, you know, I don't think the next step of the band is going to include us. And there was something else I was getting at. You know, we were sort of talking about like, okay, we need to write a new record. So this would have been 2010. So 2 years after Controller was released.
Yeah.
We were like, okay, it's about time that we start writing. But there's a lot of like changes going on. You know, Ryan had just had his first kid. And it just seemed like things were changing, and I didn't really know. I wasn't really interested in writing another Misery Signals record at that time.
Yeah.
And like, that's another thing with all those sort of like our peer bands, like those bands are really great musicians for the most part. And again, like, I've always just been more of like a punk rock guitar player. So I wasn't sure that I could start writing stuff that was going to take the band to the next level. I think it was just a lot of, you know, just a product of the environment that I was in. And I just didn't feel like it was the next step for me at that time.
And you mentioned that, like, obviously it wasn't kind of the end of music. See, you then joined with Life, which, until I did my sort of like research a book before this, I didn't even realize you were part of that band. So that's kind of like a bit of naivety on my kind of part, because I don't know, like, when I discovered that band, like, I didn't have it associated with obviously Misery Signals in any shape or form, but lo and behold, there you are, sort of thing. So was it like, I don't know, was it just, I guess because you said like having that kind of not being in the mindset of wanting to write a Misery Signals album, was this just like a new outlet that you kind of wanted to explore? Like, how did like becoming part of that band, and then obviously being the singer in that band, like, was that something that you wanted to try out? Like, how did that all come about?
I mean, I had known the guys, and just to be clear, you kind of cut out for a second, but you're talking about Living with Lines.
Yes, yeah.
So I'd known those guys for like a few years leading up to that, just coming through Vancouver. They were mutual friends with another band from Vancouver called The Textbook Tragedy, who were like just like a metalcore band.
Yeah.
That we were buddies with. And so I just known those guys for years. And again, like, I love like punk music, and Living with Lines, you know, some of their earlier records are very like of that sound, you know, like bands like Face to Face and that sort of style, which is music that I love. So yeah, it was just kind of like the timing was there. Like Bill, who was playing bass in, he's the bass player from A Textbook Tragedy, who is now the bass player in a band called Spirit Box, who are fantastic, and people should know about that band if they don't. But Bill was playing with Living with Lines at that point and had said, hey, like Living with Lines singer isn't in the band anymore. We have these tours coming up. We're trying to finish a record. Do you want to like sing on the record and do the tours? Like just try it out or whatever. So yeah, the timing just kind of happened right when I was having these thoughts about leaving Misery Signals. So it just kind of happened that way. It wasn't like a planned approach or anything. I knew I'd be leaving Misery Signals, and then yeah, that opportunity to do Living with Lines was just there. And like, I love the dudes in that band and we were buddies. So it was a really easy transition and it was fun. And it was like, after grinding it out with Misery Signals for so long, it just felt like something fresh and new, and it was fun. And like the dynamic was different, you know, like, and that's not to say that I wasn't getting along with the guys in Misery Signals, but we'd spent so much time together, you know, and it was like exciting to be making music with different people and totally like a totally different sound from what Misery Signals was doing.
And in terms of you kind of like stepping into the vocal sort of role, like, was that sort of something that you enjoyed? Was it a sort of a daunting challenge? And like, was it just something that you wanted to try out?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. I remember when Bill hit me up, I was like, thought that he was going to ask me about guitar, which I would have been like, yeah, fuck yeah, I'll play guitar.
Yeah.
And when he said singing, I was like, I can try, you know? So I like did like a demo and they were like, yeah, it's good enough. And like, dude, I would hate to hear it now. Like, I'm sure it's fucking terrible. And I mean, like recording the vocals for that record was funny because it's like I had zero experience. So it was like a lot of trial and error. And the guy that engineered it, like, thank God he was patient, you know, because like we would just like hammer out like 8 and 10 hours a day of just like vocal takes, and he was just like,
God, fucking hell.
We'll make it work, you know. And like the vocals on Holy Shit are probably really like comped. Like I assume like none of it is like a straight performance, you know, like a lot of it is just like this word is good, this word is good, this word is good. Okay, we need these words. And it's funny, like, you know, through like the time that I was actually singing for that band, like I was a pretty bad singer. So it's like now being, you know, 10 years on from that, like I feel like I'm still not like a great singer, but I understand the way that my vocal range works, and like I have a better understanding of like how to sing now. You know, like a few years ago we did some like I still play with Living with Lions like here and there, like in whatever capacity they need me to do. Like sometimes they need somebody to play bass for like a show or for a tour, and I'll do it because like they're great friends of ours. And I mean, two of the guys from Living with Lions, like the two main dudes in Living with Lions, are in Comeback Kid as well now. So it's like we're very like incestuous in that sense. But you know, like a couple years back, they had a tour booked, and this was like right before their new record was coming out. But the guitar player who was now singing, Chase, had like a pretty bad hernia, and he was like, "Yo, I want to do these shows, but like I can't sing. Like, there's no way I can sing right now. Do you want to just sing and I'll play bass?" And I was like, "All right, sure." So like, you know, like I'm not the singer for the band, but we did like these like 4 shows where I just sang. And I was like, we were like laughing because we were like, fuck, those are probably like the best 4 shows I ever played performance wise, just because like actually like have some idea of like how to sing now. Yeah, sorry, I'm just like running off.
No, that's cool, man. That's cool. I appreciate it. Oh, you kind of mentioned sort of like obviously them guys be some of the guys that are Living in Lines in Comeback Kid. Obviously now you're like in Comeback Kid. So how did that kind of come about? Obviously, you mentioned knowing Andrew from before as well.
Yeah.
So, like, was it just through association of knowing him that you became part of the band, and then kind of on a wider aspect? Because obviously, at that point, Comeback Kid have already got this momentum behind them. They're already kind of considered a staple of the worldwide hardcore scene. So, what was it like joining that band and kind of knowing they already had this reputation behind them?
Yeah, where to begin? I mean, Comeback Kid has always been one of my favorite bands. You know, like when we were touring with 3 or 4 back in the day, they had just started Comeback Kid. There was a demo, and then when Turn It Around came out, I was like, damn, this is like this is like the music that I like love. Like it's like it's skate punk, but it's like a hardcore band. You know, it's like it's got like octaves and like a lot of like melodic elements, but it's still like got like really hard breakdowns. And I you know, I just like instantly fell in love with Comeback Kid. And then when Wake the Dead came out, I was just like, it's done, it's over. There's never a better record. But so we had known those guys for years, and again, like Comeback Kid being a Canadian band, and being again like as far as like punk or hardcore goes, like being a higher profile band in the country, you know. So we did some touring with Comeback Kid. We did like a couple Canadian runs. We did like a European run, and I'm saying Comeback Kid and Misery Signals. So, you know, we had already known each other for a really long time, and I'd become friends with at the time, their guitar player, Casey. Him and I got along really well. We just good buddies. So at that point, when Casey was like leaving the band, I was playing with Living with Lions, and still just really good friends with those guys. And Casey said, "Hey, you know, I'm gonna leave Comeback Kid." He's like, "You should totally play guitar for Comeback Kid." And I was like, "You're right. I should play guitar for Comeback." So at that point, and especially too, you know, after grinding out with like Living with Lions for like a year or so, like it was all fun, but it was like I think I knew that like if I wanted to keep doing this long term, that like it wasn't going to happen with Living with Lions. And I did miss playing guitar. You know, like playing guitar is such a like huge part of like who I am. You know, and I just wasn't really playing guitar. And so when Casey was like, "Yo, I'm gonna leave the band," I was like, "All right, well, I'm gonna play guitar for the band." So I just like instantly just started like bugging Andrew like via text message, just being like, "Yo, let me do this tour like that they had coming up that they need a guitar player for." And he was like, "Yeah, okay, like yeah, we'll see. I just don't want to like bum out the Lions guys." And I was probably just like, "I don't care. Like I'll do it. I'm gonna do it. Like just like let's roll with it." So yeah, I just kind of like teased and bugged him via text for a long time, and then just started learning the songs. And I did that tour, and it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, we'll try it out, see how the tour goes. So I did that tour, and then it was like, okay, well, we got another tour in like 2 weeks. And then I was on that tour, and then it was one of those things where, you know, after doing that for like a year, kind of being like, well, am I in the band? And it was never like, and me being the person that I am, I'm just kind of pushy and just kind of like forced my way into the position. And then I was like, I'm in the band. And then, you know, we got where it was time to write a new record. And I was like, well, I want to write for the record. And they're like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, well, here are these songs. And they're like, oh, okay. And I'm like, use this one. And just kind of like forced my way into the fold, you know?
Yeah. And then like,
can I break for like 1 second?
Yeah, of course, man.
Sorry about that, man.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, so I just kind of like forced my way into the band.
Yeah. So then in terms of like kind of then getting the ball rolling with that and stuff, because as I said, like Comeback had already had this kind of reputation and stuff. So, and I guess we kind of touched upon like Misery Signals had this almost kind of cult following, but was it like surreal to kind of see the following that Comeback Kid had and still have to this day? Like, is that kind of a bit of a culture shock for you, or because you'd kind of grown up seeing them guys and kind of playing with them guys in the past, like you were kind of used to it straight off the bat?
Yeah, definitely. I think like, you know, I had always viewed Comeback Kid as like a bigger band, you know, like so joining the band though, like, you know, obviously there was like a lot of like it was really exciting because they're definitely a band, like, you know, like playing Wake the Dead with Comeback Kid at like a festival, or like even like like crazy. It's like a crazy thing because it's like that song is like such a big thing. So there was points of playing with the band where I was like, whoa, this is fucking crazy. But it's like, again, it touches on kind of like what we were talking about earlier, though. Like, Comeback Kid is a successful band. They have like a long history, and you know, will continue to put out records and will continue to be like a touring band. Is, I think, dude, I think that band will go on forever. You know, I think it's
Yeah.
we're gonna be like 60-year-old dudes on tour, I think. But like anything else, you know, all the excitement and all the cool stuff kind of like plateaus at a point, you know. And it's
Yeah.
not to like go too far off path here, but it's like one thing that, like, you know, I've thought about a lot, especially in the last few months with like not being able to tour and sort of like being in a band and that part of my identity kind of taken away, is like I feel like I'm gonna have a new appreciation for that stuff again, you know. Like it's gonna feel back to it and like kind of shed all the, not that there's like a lot of negativity, but you know, like you do anything long enough and you start to find problems with it.
Yeah, of course.
And nothing internally. Like, I love all those guys. We're all great friends, but just like the grind of being on tour and sort of like the Groundhog Day elements of it, you know, can get tiring. And so even on a great day when you're playing a festival to 20,000 people and you're having like the time of your life, you're still like, oh shit, I'm tired, I want to go to bed. Like, you know, where you should be like, this is the best, I love this, you know. So I'm looking forward to getting back to that. But to come back full circle, joining Comeback Kid was like crazy because they're a band that I loved musically, and they are a band that has had great success. And you know, I've been lucky enough to be present for a lot of that. You know, and I did miss like the sort of the heyday of, you know, the rise of Wake the Dead and stuff like that. But those songs still resonate with people, and when we play those songs, people still love it. So it's cool. It's kind of cool, like, you know, being able to play in a band like Misery Signals that has like an album like of Malice that people like love and think is a very important record to that genre, and then to also be able to play in Comeback Kid and play those songs that they wrote that are so important to so many people. It's kind of cool. It's like kind of like getting to be in Metallica and Megadeth, or, you know, like obviously on like a different scale, but
yeah, no, that's cool. But then in terms, like, as you say, like kind of like forcing your way into the band and then getting to the point of like adding to that legacy of Comeback Kid, like I don't know, because obviously, like as you say, they'd kind of already had this back catalogue of albums and stuff, and I don't know, it might be like just my perception of like what I'd be like in that position, but as you said, like you're very forceful in that sense. But was there a sense of trepidation of like, oh, I don't know if this is like the right way to approach a Comeback Kid song, or were you very confident of like, no, this is how I want to put my stamp on what Comeback Kid is. This is the Stu Ross approach to Comeback Kid.
It's definitely a challenge because I think like my perception of what Comeback Kid is very different from their perception. And you'd think like those guys would be like, all right, well, we've done this X amount of times. Here we go. Here's another like melodic hardcore song. And it's, you know, it's that easy, but it's like, those guys are ever evolving as songwriters and things like that, you know. Andrew is a very like eclectic musician, you know, like he writes a lot of really cool, interesting, different music, and he's always kind of trying to take the next step. So, you know, whereas like I will write a song for Comeback Kid and it'll be, you know, here's the verse, here's the chorus, here's the breakdown, here's the octave chords, classic Comeback Kid, just sing on it, you know. You might just be like, I've been there, done that, you know, I'm not trying to do that again. So that's a bit of a struggle because like I want to write music for Comeback Kid that I think represents my perception of Comeback Kid, whereas those guys are just trying to write the next record for the band. I don't know, like it's kind of like a hard thing to explain. I guess being like a person who is an outsider coming into the band, yeah, I feel like I need to write music that sounds like Comeback Kid, whereas those guys are just writing music, and whatever music they write, it'll be Comeback Kid, if that makes sense.
No, I get that. Like you've got a kind of almost like kind of like like a cloud over your head of like, this is what your expectations are, whereas like they're like, no, 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 we're over here, sort of thing.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
yeah, and it's a weird thing because again, like some of those early records that they did, you know, that like I think Broadcasting is the best Comeback Kid record, but those
Yeah.
guys hate it. You know, they're like, oh,
Oh, really?
that's our worst record, and I'm like, dude, it's got some of the like sickest Comeback Kid like guitar parts, and like overall, I just think it's such a cool record, and those guys don't like it. They don't like playing the songs and stuff. And like part of me, well, maybe if you just played the songs more, you'd realize that people like it, you know. So again, yeah, you know, like when I'm writing stuff for the band, I want it to sound like Broadcasting or Wake the Dead, whereas those guys are always progressing, you know,
yeah,
where they want to take the band. So writing is always interesting, like especially with us being in like everybody's isolated at this point too. Like we're sending a lot of demos back and forth, trying to prep for writing a new record now. And yeah, it's wild, man. Like Jeremy sent a ton of stuff that like is very Jeremy, and I think it sounds very Comeback Kid. And Andrew sent some songs where like some of them I'm like, yeah, this is a Comeback Kid song, and then some of them I'm like, what is going on here? This is really weird. And again, I think my stuff's kind of in the middle where it's like I just kind of write stuff that I think is fitting for the band. But it's kind of the cool thing that I've come to realize, you know, writing music for Misery Signals or writing music for Comeback Kid, is that the vocals will just always really determine whether it is like, you know, you could write something that's totally out of the box, but as soon as you put like one of those vocalists on it, it becomes like, you know, a Misery Signal song or a Comeback Kid song.
Yeah.
I think the vocals really sort of like just can make any song a Comeback Kid song if Andrew's singing on it, you know. And
yeah,
you know, so
and
it's a wild thing.
And then to kind of come full circle, obviously, like you rejoin Misery Signals, and that becomes an active band again. As not that it never wasn't, but it was kind of laying dormant for a little while and things like that. So, why did you? Was it just a case of time, like the perfect like timing, stars aligned for you to go back to Misery Signals, like? Or was it just a conversation that was had? Like, how did you kind of go back into that fold?
Well, in an like, you know, in hindsight, it's kind of funny because I'm not even sure that I necessarily would have had to quit the band to do the things that I wanted to do, because at that point, Misery Signals did become very inactive.
Yeah.
Ryan was a new father, and his life was changing quite a bit. He had moved from Milwaukee to Boise, and things had really slowed down with the band anyway. And that's not to say like Kyle and I leaving didn't make things harder, you know, that definitely like slowed things down quite a bit. But, you know, in like the grand scheme of Misery Signals, I think like I missed like 3 tours, you know, in the band. But for them, you know, doing like Absent Light, I almost feel like that's like a record that couldn't have happened if I was in the band. It's very dark, and it's very like progressive, and it's very metallic for Misery Signals. I think it like really represents like, you know, that period of the band. And I think there's a very noticeable difference between, you know, Malice, Mirrors, Controller, Ultraviolet, and Absent Light. You know, like I think it's pretty, if you're into the band, you will notice that I guess there's elements that are different from those other records. But how it came to be was sort of, we did the 10-year anniversary tour of Malice and Magnum Heart. And that tour in itself was just like, I think it was very cathartic for everyone in a sense, because everyone had sort of grown apart through all that, you know, like Kyle hadn't been in the band for a while, and then he had come back sort of near the end of Absent Light and was playing bass for the band again. You know, I hadn't really spoken with Ryan and Brandon a lot over those years. And then, you know, especially Jesse, like none of us had really kept in great touch with Jesse through the years. There was a lot of animosity between all of us, I think. Nothing that was ever like really overtly vocalized to one another, but I think there was a lot of stuff that was underlying that we didn't really ever talk about. And doing those shows, I think, was kind of like, as I said, like, it was very cathartic. There was a lot of time in the van. And I mean, with it being like a special occasion, there was a lot of reflection and talking about, you know, back in the day and good old shows and these experiences and these stories. And we spent a lot of time talking and communicating on that tour. And it was very short. But those shows were so special. You know, some of the best shows that the band has ever played and probably will ever play. You know, particularly Vancouver, Edmonton, Toronto, New York City. Those shows were like some of the best shows I'll probably ever play in my life, just because they were so meaningful.
Yeah.
Because those shows, you know, for some people it might have been the first time seeing the band, but for a lot of people, like, that was people coming together to celebrate this record that like has so much meaning and has had such a large impact on their lives. So I mean, yeah, take all that into account, and like, you know, all the emotion and the excitement and the fun that surrounded that. You know, it was kind of an opportunity where, you know, with Ryan, you know, we were talking about, you know, maybe I had said like, oh, well, you know, next time you guys do a record, like, I wouldn't mind like helping out or writing a couple songs if you're like open to that. And then, you know, that kind of turned into us being like, okay, well, let's write some songs. And the intention originally was to still keep Greg in the fold, the guy that had been playing guitar while I was out of the band. And we were like, okay, well, let's like write some songs and then we'll run them by Greg and like see his take on them. But then the process just became like really long and drawn out. You know, it took us like years and years and years to write, just because we'd get together, we'd write some songs, we'd demo them, we'd sit on them for like 3 months and be like, wait, no, this isn't good. And then, you know, we'd go back and like rewrite songs or like completely trash other songs. And then eventually it just got to a point where like, I think Greg had moved on, you know, with he engineers and produces music. And he was busy, you know, doing so yeah, it just never came back that way. But then, you know, Greg did come into the fold. He did the vocal production, he mixed the record. And, you know, he kind of like executive produced the record, which was great too, after sitting on the record for so long, sitting on the songs for so long, finally putting like somebody else's ear on them and having them be like, no, it is good. It's cool, man. Like, you're worrying about it too much. That was cool. But yeah, so basically we did the Malice tour, and then that just turned into us sort of writing another record. And again, it was good. Like, I think for Jesse, it was something that he'd been away from for so long, and then to do those shows, you know, I'm not sure he was ready to put a close to that chapter. You know, I'm not sure he wanted it to stop. And I think it was a good opportunity for him to sort of like unload a lot of the weight that he had been carrying for the last, you know, 10 or 15 years. And it's been good. I think it has been good for our personal relationships. I think there's always going to be some animosity between us, but like not in a way that like stops us from functioning as a band. I think tension can be good in those circumstances, and especially with the band not being a band that, you know, is going to tour 10 months a year. It's workable. You can work with it, you know?
Yeah. And sort of on that kind of note, as you say, like almost kind of like for Jesse kind of getting sort of like a second bite of the cherry in some aspects, and for all of you guys to kind of like get back together, and as you say, it took a while to kind of get this record to where it is. But do you think that, as cliche as this question is going to sound, like you are all older now, and like as you say, there is going to still be that animosity, but like because you've grown as people, like you can understand like those elements, not necessarily water under the bridge, but like it's not something that you're going to hold a grudge over, kind of thing, and that's kind of helped you. I kind of guess have a look at Misery Signals with a fresh pair of eyes, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Again, I think like part of what made writing Ultraviolet so unique again was that in a sense it was like a healing process for the band collectively. And I think that's like represented pretty clearly through Jesse's lyrics, as you'll hear when the record's out. I mean, the lyrics really deal with growth and hope and sort of finding the positivity in within the negativity, I guess. Yeah, or I mean, overall, I think it was a great thing, and I think it was the appropriate step for the band to take at the time. And now that we've done it, it's like we don't know what the next step is. You know, who knows if we'll do another record? I don't know, but
yeah. And just in terms of kind of like again that sort of idea of getting the band back together kind of thing, but like having like Jesse back and kind of the original core sort of thing. Was it just for you personally, was it just kind of nice to sort of be back in that environment and sort of writing with those guys again, like in general, rather than it like being a Misery Signals thing, like just on a personal level?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, writing with those guys is really, really cool. You know, Brandon and Ryan are amazing musicians, and I mean, I think part of what makes Misery Signals unique, which we kind of touched on earlier, is, you know, like with Brandon and Ryan being such gifted musicians, they're capable of writing and playing pretty much anything, you know.
Yeah,
and then you get guys like myself and Kyle and Jesse in the room who are just creative in a different sense, you know what I mean? Like, so I think that's why there's always like, there's something, again, like kind of unique about Misery Signal sound, is that there's just so many different like elements that play into the way that we write music. And, you know, we kind of, you know, the three of us kind of bring this simplicity and structure to the music that like Ryan and Brennan are obviously very capable of doing, but, you know, they also bring these parts where they really shine and really push these sort of progressive musical ideas, which kind of makes it a unique scenario. And I think that's kind of the thing with Misery Signals that always existed, which kind of makes the band different from other bands, I guess. So yeah, writing together again was very cool, and you know, it's something that I think we're all really excited about, and I think we're all really happy with the outcome.
And obviously, like, I'm gonna go into my sort of journalist mode here a bit more, but like in terms of like when you guys kind of like released like the first teaser that you were releasing new music, and then obviously the first single, and the fact that that is that kind of, this is the quote unquote original Misery Signals lineup sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like, obviously that got fans excited straight off the bat sort of thing. And as we mentioned at the kind of the beginning of this conversation, like when the band first started, there was already a buzz around it. And it kind of seems like there's now a second wave of that buzz. So are you feeling that from the inside, that like fans are getting excited about you guys again? Not that they necessarily weren't, but as you say, like, that period of inactivity, like the fans were maybe bubbling underneath the surface and now they're at boiling point kind of thing. Can you guys feel that and see that?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And it's been, you know, the reception has been warm and cold, you know, like some people are, you know, they'll hear like Tempest or something and they're like, well, this sounds nothing like, you know, old Misery Signals. Like, you guys said it was going to sound like Malice. So it's like, well, I mean, it does in the regard that like we're the same five guys that made that record, but it's also 15 years later and we write music different than we did when we were 22 years old. So yeah, I mean, it's good to see that people are still interested, and it's great that people are excited about the record as far as I can tell. And again, it's just one of those things where I'm like, well, I hope people like it, you know. Like, I don't want to bum people out. I think it's got some really great Misery Signal songs. I think it's got like a couple of my favorite Misery Signal songs ever. So we'll see how people receive it when it's fully released. Not too far now, like a month away, it'll be out.
Yeah. And just in terms of kind of like the release, because obviously like under normal circumstances, like obviously you're doing this interview with me, but like you'd be doing a lot more sort of press and things like that, and you'd potentially be doing tours and stuff. But obviously because of that, everything's a bit weird at the moment. So does it kind of feel weird to be promoting an album at this time, and kind of how have you guys kind of like as a band kind of decided to approach like, because I don't know, like I've seen some bands are just sort of like, we've got new music, here it is, like we're not going to kind of do any promotion, just enjoy it because we're all locked in our houses, sort of thing. How have you guys decided to approach things at the moment?
Well, that was kind of our take. Like we had been pushing to release the record like further and further and further. We had hoped to have it out like last year.
Oh, okay.
And then things just kind of got pushed and got pushed and got pushed. And, kind of maybe around like February or whatever is when we were like kind of putting all the final pieces into place with releasing the record. And then, with the pandemic and stuff, we were like, oh shit, well, maybe this isn't a good time to release the record because we're not going to be able to tour off of it. But then we also thought like, yeah, I mean, why delay it? I mean, it's cool. It's a good time. In a way, it's a good time to release a record. People have time to give it their attention.
Yeah.
And also, again, like I said, like with the record being sort of this album that's full of like a hopeful message, I think it's kind of a good time for that to be released, because I think it'll be relatable for people. I think a lot of people are going through a lot of stuff that they don't even understand, like myself, there's a lot of emotions that I'm dealing with daily that are in turn just a result of sort of life being put on hold. So I think it's cool to be able to give people something to listen to and something to like make them feel good and something to relate to. So I'm hopeful that that's what people will take away from this record. And again, it's kind of funny with like, talking about earlier, always wanting the band to be bigger and maybe this will be the next step to take the band to the next level. None of us are concerned with that at this point.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, for us, it's not like, oh, we can release this record and next thing you know, we'll be headlining X festival or whatever, like that's not concerned with at this point anymore. Just being able to do the band in any capacity, I think is like what's most important for us at this point. So releasing the record during a pandemic really makes no difference,
Yeah.
And hopefully, when this is all figured out, hopefully we'll be able to do some touring off of it. And hopefully by the time that happens, people have had time to let the record sink in and maybe those songs will, matter to people when we play them live.
Yeah, yeah. And I can't remember if it was yourself or Kyle that I'd kind of had this conversation with last summer when we were touring together. But like there was talks of you guys coming to the UK at some point, and then obviously now that's kind of all gone by the wayside. But like, have you? Because as we're starting to see things ease and lockdowns and whatever sort of slow down a bit, like have you guys started conversations about potential tours and stuff, or at the moment are you just kind of playing things completely by ear?
It's totally by ear right now. I mean, we did our best to sort of, like we had tours for May and June that were canceled, and then we're like, okay, well, it's only gonna be 2 weeks, so we'll just figure it out.
Yeah.
Now it just kind of seems like pointless to be trying to schedule anything because we're unsure of like really how this is gonna play out, right?
Yeah.
One thing I will say, like, the UK, especially for some reason, it's just one of those pockets in the world where it seems like people get Misery Signals and people like the band. So, coming back to the UK is definitely a priority for the band. That show that we played in London last March was like, one of the best Misery Signal shows that we ever played.
Yeah.
And obviously we want to be able to do that again. And yeah, like I said, the UK is a priority. It's always been a place where we could play, and it felt good to play there. It was always a challenge to come overseas because the UK would be great, and then mainland Europe was always a little like dicey. And we discovered that it was the same way 10 years later when we just did that.
Yeah.
Like again, the couple of UK shows were really, really awesome, and then the mainland shows were lukewarm. Some places were good, some places were okay. But yes, I mean, I think we're really hopeful to come back to the UK. Like, as you said, it was something that we had talked about. I think there's some really cool bands in the UK right now that we'd love to be playing with. So yeah, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that next year. you know, hopefully, I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And just in terms of like, I could be wrong in terms of crossover, like in terms of when Misery Signal started doing shows and stuff again properly, but like, if I guess this is more of a hypothetical, but like, if there was a scheduling conflict with Misery Signals and Comeback Kid, like, what does your heart lie with Misery Signals, or is that a conversation where those things would never happen? Because I know, obviously, for people that don't know, Kyle obviously has a hand in stuff with Comeback Kid behind the scenes as well. So that's two members of Misery Signals gone off of that. So, like, I don't know, would there be those conflicts, or are you quite a well-oiled machine that you could work things out?
Well, I mean, the way we did have 2020 laid out, we had like, it was like, dude, it's like scientific. We were like, we had like beakers out. Like we had it like laid out really well, you know, like it was going to be pretty nutty. Like, you know, we had a Misery Signals run, then we had a couple days off, and then there was another Misery Signals run, a couple days off, and then we jump right into a Comeback Kid tour, and you know, come home and a couple days later we'd start a Miz run, and then that's okay because the Comeback Kid tour would start at this point. So we had everything like really, really laid out, and obviously that all fell apart. But you know, when we started doing Misery Signals again, I think it was pretty like I was pretty clear about Comeback Kid being my priority.
Okay.
And that's not to say that I love one or the other more. It's just, you know, I've been in Comeback Kid longer now than I was ever in Misery Signals.
Right. Yeah.
And like I said earlier, as much as like I love Misery Signals, I'm not like a huge like metalcore fan. It's not like what I like live and breathe for, you know, but like whereas like Comeback Kid is like a very like punk hardcore band, and it's like the music that I really love, and it's something that I'm like really, really deeply passionate about. And again, that's not to say that I don't love Misery Signals. It's just Comeback Kid has been something that's been, you know, a huge, really important part of my life in the last 10 years. And it's definitely my priority at the end of the day. But you know what, like everybody else has priorities as well. You know, Ryan and Jesse are both parents. Jesse's a school teacher. Ryan is a jiu-jitsu coach. Brandon, the drummer from Misery Signals, is a drum tech he's Fall Out Boy's drum tech. So he's touring with them all too. So, and again, like, you know, like Misery Signals is an awesome thing that we love to do, but, you know, Brandon's job is a drum tech. That's, you know, and he has to commit, he has to have that commitment. He can't just say like, sorry guys, I got to go play a weekend with Misery Signals, find another drum tech. And that's the same for me, you know, like with Comeback Kid, I would not be like, okay, well just go to fill in, because like I just wouldn't feel comfortable with that. Like I you know, doing Comeback Kid is my priority. So, you know, we've had the conversation a few times in the Misery Signals camp where it's just like, well, if this doesn't work out, like I'm not going to be upset if you guys get somebody to play guitar, you know, like if you guys really do this tour and I'm unavailable, like no hard feelings, like do the thing, like we're all friends, like it's not a big deal, and somebody can do a 2-week tour with the band that's not me. It's not going to like offend me, you know. I want the band I want the band to be able to be active and in whatever capacity that is. In saying that, I don't think we could ever do a tour without Brandon, you know, like I don't think the band could ever tour without Brandon. The band could never tour without Jesse singing at this point. So it's like, you know, a guitar player is kind of interchangeable. You know, people
don't beat yourself down like that, Stu.
Yeah, people are coming to be like, whoa, that guy, you know. People are coming to see the band. So, you know, again, we're all like really good friends. So it's like everybody understands. We're all adults now. It's not like you know, nobody gets like offended by these things anymore. And you know, I'd be happy to be a part of what I can be a part of, and I think everybody else shares the same sentiment.
Yeah, and just before I start to round things off, like you mentioned that before all of this, like you look to have like quite a heavy schedule in terms of 2020, and something that I always kind of find interesting in some aspects is someone in your circumstances who is married and has obviously like a family life and things like that. So like, how do you kind of balance that? And like, I don't want to like obviously speak for your wife and things like that, because I don't know her at all, but like I'm assuming she's cool with you going away for periods of time, like, but how do those conversations kind of go about? And like, is it a case of like she's just accepted this is what you do? Is there give and take? Like, how does that work?
Well, I mean, our relationship, you know, we met. She's Australian, so I met her when I was on tour.
Oh, okay.
Um, and I mean, that's just kind of like been my life. It's been our life. You know, she grew up in Australia in, you know, the punk and hardcore scene. She was going to shows her whole life. You know, she's the world's biggest Silverchair fan. She's been going to concerts since she was a little girl.
Yeah.
So, you know, she gets it. She totally understands the lifestyle. She's come on tour with us before. And I mean, one cool thing about being in a touring band at our age now, it's like, you know, say we do go over and tour Europe for a couple of weeks, you know, one plane ticket's paid, you know? So like for her to fly over and for us to take a vacation, it's very doable. So
Yeah.
there are like cool benefits of this lifestyle in that regard, which are countered by, you know, some bummers of, you know, being away for weeks on end and not seeing each other. But thankfully she's super patient and very understanding about the way that my lifestyle is. In ways, the pandemic has actually been like, I think it's been really great for our relationship. You know, I've been home for like 6 months, which is kind of crazy to say, but probably the most time we've ever spent together consecutively.
Oh, wow.
You know?
Yeah.
Like day in, day out. You know, we've been
Yeah.
together for over 10 years, but it's like, you know, it's always been, well, I'm gone for a few weeks. See you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that applies for everybody else in the band too. You know, Ryan's got 2 kids, Jesse's got a kid. And with Comeback Kid, Jeremy's got 2 kids, you know, so it's cool being in touring bands and being the age we are, because like, although we're all like living like a Peter Pan lifestyle in a way, we're also like adult about it now, and the circumstances change, and it's almost more comfortable doing what we do now than it was when you were younger, because it's like you have these things at home that kind of keep you anchored, and make you feel like you have a real life as opposed to yeah. No, we're all lucky. All our partners are all really cool, and I think all of us in both camps, in Misery Signals and in Comeback Kid, we're all very lucky that we have great partners. We have great families that support what we do, and have, you know, really assisted us in being able to do this as long as we have.
Yeah. Stu, how I like to finish these conversations is to ask my guest what their favourite song is, but with a little bit of a twist. But you're going to get 2 bites of the cherry because obviously 2 active bands. Okay. So what's your favourite Misery Signals and favourite Comeback Kid song that you like to play live, and why?
Okay. So with Misery Signals, I think like, okay, so both bands, like, okay, so Misery Signals, obviously playing The Year Summer Ended in June is like, every time we ever play that song, it's like a very powerful and moving experience.
Yeah.
Just in context of like, you know, what the song is about, and it's very personal for all of us in the band, because we went through this like really tremendously terrible experience together, and you know, here we are like fucking 18 years later, out here doing something that like is just so special and significant. So playing that song is like, without fail, every time we play that song, it's probably the most important and one of my favorite Misery Signals songs to play. We haven't got to play any of the new stuff live, but there's a few songs on that new record that I love. I love The Tempest, and I know people out there are giving mixed reviews, man, but I just think it's great. I think it's a great song, and I think it really encompasses, you know, Misery Signals as a whole. And I'm looking forward to playing that song. I think it's got a great positive message, and I think like, I'm very hopeful that people will latch onto that, and I'm looking forward to playing it. I'm especially looking forward to playing it in the UK, because I think people will get it, man.
Yeah.
As far as Comeback Kid goes, again, it's like the same thing. I mean, playing Wake the Dead is crazy all the time. It's the best, you know, playing that song at a festival, and like, you know, I don't know, it's just cool. It's like a cool song to play live. And again, for me, like being somebody that wasn't in the band when the song was written, it's like a trip, you know, it's like, playing the song that I love, and all these people are there, and like these people love this song as much as I do, like as a fan and as the guy performing it. So that's all a great song to play. But like there's other Comeback Kid songs I just love. Like there's a song called Wasted Arrows from Die Knowing that I think is just like really cool song. I love playing that song live. Yeah, I'll probably just I would say Wasted Arrows as far as like more modern Comeback Kid goes. That's probably my favorite song live.
Perfect. Stu, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Best of luck with the new record, and really, really hope to see you over here sooner rather than later.
Yeah, buddy. Thank you very much. It was great to catch up with you. Nice surprise to the face. I hope I didn't ramble too far off the path with some of these questions.
No, we love a good ramble. It's all good.
But yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, man. It's great.
No, it's cool, man. And yeah, we'll catch up soon.
Sounds good, buddy. Hope to see you.
Yeah, take it easy.
Okay.
So there we have it, folks. A massive thank you again to Stu for taking some time out of his day to have a little chat with me. And it was really nice to catch up with him and see him again and to have a little chat. So yeah. Also want to give a massive shout out to Hannah from Hold Tight for setting up the interview for me. They've been real supportive of the show since kind of day one, really. And as soon as we said that we were back up and running, they could not have been more accommodating in helping with this and another chat that's coming up in the coming weeks. So yeah, massive shout out to Hold Tight and everyone over there. Yeah, so Misery Signal's new record, Ultraviolet, is out on August 7th. If you're a fan of the band, I don't think you'll be disappointed whatsoever. I've had the opportunity to hear it and it fucking rips. But as always, yeah, we'll have the links to Misery Signal stuff and Comeback Kid stuff in the description of this episode. I forgot to mention at the top of the show, these episodes will also be going out on YouTube now, as I'm trying to utilise that as another platform. Also kind of looking to do a bit more visual stuff later down the line. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, you can head over to youtube.com/Justin Insight and all the episodes will be there as well. But for now, we will be back again next week with another awesome guest. Please, once again, if you're able to rate, subscribe, review, 5 stars would be preferable. But yeah, thanks again for stopping by the Justin Insight podcast, and I will see you soon.